The blood on Nora Preston's hands had been scrubbed away years ago, but her brother Thomas still saw it every time he looked at her, and that invisible stain had shaped every moment of her 22 years in ways that left scars deeper than any blade could cut. She stood at the window of their small ranch house outside Cheyenne, Wyoming, watching the endless prairie grass bend beneath the autumn wind of 1882, her fingers gripping the wooden frame so tightly her knuckles turned white. Behind her, she could hear Thomas moving through the house with that deliberate heaviness he had adopted since their father died last winter, leaving them alone together, in a silence that felt more suffocating than any words. "You planning to stand there all day?" Thomas's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and cold as always when he addressed her. "Those chickens need feeding, and the fence by the north pasture has 3 posts down. Or did you forget we have actual work to do?" Nora turned slowly, meeting her brother's eyes for just a moment before looking away. At 26, Thomas had their father's strong jaw and broad shoulders, but where their father had possessed warmth and forgiveness, Thomas carried only bitterness. "I was just about to go out," she said softly, reaching for her worn jacket that hung by the door. "Sure you were." He crossed his arms, blocking her path just enough to make his point. "Just like you were just about to check on Ma that night, just about to get the doctor, just about to do something useful instead of running off to that church social." The familiar words hit her like stones, each one carefully aimed at the guilt that lived permanently in her chest. She had been 14 when their mother fell ill with pneumonia, when the fever had spiked so suddenly that terrible February night. Nora had been at the church helping prepare for the Valentine's social, and by the time she returned home, their mother was unconscious. She died 3 hours later, before the doctor could even arrive through the snowstorm. "I know, Thomas," Nora whispered, pulling her jacket on. "I know it was my fault. Knowing doesn't change anything, does it?" He stepped aside finally, letting her pass. "Doesn't bring her back. Doesn't give me my mother for my wedding day, or for when Sarah died in childbirth. You got to keep living your life while Ma rotted in the ground because you wanted to dance and flirt instead of being where you were supposed to be." Nora fled out the door before the tears could come, before he could see how deeply the words still cut even after 8 years of hearing variations of the same accusation. The morning air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. She hurried toward the chicken coop, her vision blurring as she tried to focus on the simple task ahead of her. She had stopped defending herself years ago. What was the point? Thomas was right. She had left her mother's side when she should have stayed. She had been selfish, wanting just one night of normalcy, of being a girl at a dance instead of a caretaker, watching her mother's labored breathing. And her mother had died because of it. The chickens clucked and scattered as she entered their enclosure, throwing grain with mechanical efficiency. Her hands moved automatically, while her mind drifted to that familiar dark place where she kept all her self-recrimination locked away. She barely noticed when one of the hens pecked at her boot or when the rooster crowed indignantly at her presence. "Those birds giving you trouble, miss?" The voice startled her so badly she dropped the grain bucket, sending it clattering across the dirt. She spun around to find a man standing just outside the chicken wire fence, his hat in his hands, and an apologetic smile on his weathered face. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of summer sky. His clothes marked him as a ranch hand, or cowboy, worn denim and leather chaps dusty from riding. "I did not mean to scare you," he said, his voice carrying a gentle warmth that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "I was just riding past and noticed your fence posts were down on the north side. Thought I should let someone know before your cattle wander off." Nora bent quickly to retrieve the bucket, using the moment to compose herself and wipe at her eyes. "Thank you for telling us. My brother and I will see to it." "I could help if you like." He stepped closer, and she could see he was probably in his mid-20s, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, despite the serious expression he wore now. "Name's James Sutton. I have been working at the Richardson spread about 10 miles east, but I am between jobs at the moment. Would not mind lending a hand for a few hours in exchange for a meal, if you have got one to spare. We could not ask you to do that, Nora said automatically, though her mind was already racing. Thomas had been complaining about those fence posts for a week, but with just the two of them trying to manage all the ranch work, everything took twice as long as it should. We can manage on our own. James Sutton tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Forgive me for being forward, miss, but you look like someone who has been managing on her own for quite some time. Sometimes accepting help is not a sign of weakness. It is just good sense. Something in his words, or perhaps in the kindness of his tone, cracked something inside her. She found herself nodding before she could think better of it. I suppose if you are offering. My brother is inside. I should ask him first. Lead the way, James said, settling his hat back on his head. Nora walked toward the house with her heart hammering inexplicably hard in her chest. She could not remember the last time a stranger had spoken to her with such easy gentleness, without judgment or expectation. Most people in Cheyenne knew her story, knew that Thomas blamed her for their mother's death, and they treated her accordingly with either pity or agreement. Thomas was in the kitchen when she entered, pouring himself coffee. His expression soured immediately when he saw James following behind her. Who is this? James Sutton, sir. James extended his hand, which Thomas looked at for a long moment before shaking grudgingly. I was riding past and noticed your fence situation. Offered to help repair it in exchange for a meal. Your sister said I should ask you first. Did she now? Thomas's gaze flicked to Nora with something like suspicion. And what makes you think we need help from a drifter? Thomas, Nora said quietly, shame heating her cheeks. He is just trying to be neighborly. I do not recall asking your opinion on what he is trying to be, Thomas snapped. Then to James, we do not have money to pay workers right now. Did not ask for money, James replied calmly, seemingly unruffled by Thomas's hostility. Just a meal and maybe some water for my horse. I have got tools and know-how. You have got fence posts that need setting. Seems like a fair trade to me. Thomas studied him for a long moment, and Nora could practically see her brother weighing his pride against his practicality. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Fine, but I will be working alongside you. And Nora, you will bring us lunch at noon. Make something decent. Yes, Thomas, she said softly, relief washing through her. James caught her eye as he turned to follow Thomas out, and she saw something there that looked like understanding. It was such a small thing, that brief moment of connection, but it settled something in her chest that had been fluttering anxiously since he first spoke. She spent the morning in the kitchen, preparing a better lunch than she might have otherwise. She fried chicken, made biscuits from scratch, and even used some of their precious store of preserved peaches for a simple cobbler. As she worked, she found herself thinking about the cowboy with the kind eyes, wondering what his story was, why he was between jobs, whether he had family waiting for him somewhere. The thoughts were dangerous, she knew. She had learned long ago not to let herself imagine any kind of future beyond this ranch, beyond serving penance for her failures. Thomas had made it clear that she owed him and their mother's memory a lifetime of work and sacrifice. She had turned down the few tentative courtship attempts that had come her way over the years, knowing that she did not deserve happiness while her mother lay cold in the ground. But still, as she packed the food into a basket and headed out toward the north pasture, she could not quite stop the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. She found them working in the hot sun, their shirts soaked with sweat as they dug post holes and set new timber. James had removed his hat, and she could see his dark hair curling damply against his neck. They were talking as they worked, or rather James was talking while Thomas offered occasional grunted responses. Lunch, Nora called out, spreading a blanket on a patch of grass near where they were working. Thomas dropped his tools immediately and stalked over, dropping onto the blanket without ceremony. James approached more slowly, wiping his hands on his pants and giving her a genuine smile. Smells delicious, Miss Preston. Thank you for going to the trouble. It is the least we can do, she said, unpacking the food. You have been working hard all morning. Your brother is a good worker too, James said diplomatically, though Nora had noticed that Thomas had been standing back, giving orders more than actually digging. You have got a nice piece of land here. Good grazing, solid water access. Your father built something worth being proud of. Our father is dead, Thomas said flatly, tearing into a piece of chicken. Died last winter. Heart gave out. I am sorry to hear that. James sat down, cross-legged on the blanket, accepting the plate Nora handed him. That must have been hard, losing him so soon after your mother. Nora froze, her hand suspended over the basket. How did he know about their mother? Thomas's expression darkened. What do you know about our mother? James seemed to realize his mistake. I apologize. I heard some talk in town when I was passing through last week. Did not mean to bring up painful memories. Then maybe you should keep your mouth shut about things that are not your business, Thomas said sharply. But then he seemed to catch himself, remembering that this man was doing them a favor. Ma died 8 years ago. Pneumonia. Could have been prevented if certain people had been paying attention instead of gallivanting around at church socials. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Nora felt her appetite disappear completely, her stomach twisting into familiar knots. She started to stand to excuse herself, but James spoke first. Pneumonia is a vicious illness, he said quietly, his eyes on his plate. I lost my younger sister to it when I was 19. She was just 12 years old, healthy as a horse one day, and gone within a week. The doctor said even if we had gotten her to the hospital in Denver, they probably could not have saved her. Sometimes these things just happen, no matter how much we wish we could have done something different. Thomas opened his mouth, clearly ready to argue that it was not the same thing at all, but James continued. I blame myself for a long time. I was the one who let her play outside in the rain that day. I was the one who was supposed to be watching her while Ma was at the market. Carried that guilt around like a stone in my chest for years. He looked up then, meeting Nora's eyes directly. It nearly destroyed me before I realized that beating myself up over it was not going to bring Sarah back, and it was not going to honor her memory either. She would not have wanted me to stop living just because she could not. That is different, Thomas said, but there was less certainty in his voice. You were not off enjoying yourself when you should have been home. Was not I? James took a bite of his biscuit, chewing thoughtfully. I was the one who suggested we go outside and play in the first place. I thought it was fun, watching her splash in the puddles. I was enjoying myself right up until she started coughing. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Nora found she could not look away from James, from the honest pain in his eyes and the strength it must have taken to share that story. She wanted to say something, to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. Thomas stood abruptly. We should get back to work. Daylight is wasting. Of course. James handed his empty plate to Nora, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. Thank you again, Miss Preston. Best meal I have had in months. She managed a small smile. You are welcome, Mr. Sutton. As the men returned to their work, Nora packed up the remains of lunch with hands that trembled slightly. Something had shifted in the air, some small crack in the wall of guilt that had surrounded her for so long. She did not know what to do with the feeling, did not dare to hope that it might mean anything at all. But as she walked back to the house, she found herself glancing over her shoulder at the cowboy working in her north pasture, and for the first time in 8 years, she let herself wonder what it might feel like to be forgiven. The fence repair took the rest of the afternoon, and when James finally finished, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold. Nora had watched from the kitchen window as she prepared supper, telling herself she was just keeping an eye on the progress of the work and not at all interested in the way James moved with such easy confidence or the way he seemed to genuinely listen when Thomas spoke. She had just set the table when the men came back to the house. Thomas looked exhausted and irritable, but there was a grudging respect in his voice when he spoke to James. You do good work, Sutton. Fence is solid. Glad I could help. James was dusty and tired looking, but his smile was genuine. I should probably be on my way. Do not want to overstay my welcome. Stay for supper, Nora heard herself say, before she could think better of it. Both men turned to look at her in surprise. I mean, it is the least we can do after you work so hard all day. And it will be dark soon. You should not ride at night if you do not have to. Thomas frowned, clearly about to object. But James spoke first. That is very kind of you, Miss Preston. I would be grateful. They ate at the small wooden table in the kitchen, a meal that should have been awkward, but somehow was not. James had a gift for conversation, drawing out even Thomas with questions about the ranch, the cattle, the challenges of managing land in Wyoming. He spoke knowledgeably about breeds and grazing rotation and water rights, clearly a man who had spent his life around ranches and livestock. You said you were between jobs, Thomas said eventually, sopping up gravy with a piece of bread. What happened to your position at the Richardson place? Seasonal work, James explained. They needed extra hands for the summer and fall, but they are cutting back now that winter is coming. Old man Richardson suggested I try down in Colorado or maybe head west to Utah, but I have been thinking I might like to stay in this area for a while. Country suits me. Not much work to be found around Cheyenne this time of year, Thomas said. Most ranches are doing the same thing, letting go of summer help. James nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the window where the last light was fading from the sky. I figured I would just keep riding, pick up odd jobs where I can. Maybe find someone who needs help with winter preparations. Nora cleared her throat softly. We have a spare room. The bunkhouse where our father used to put seasonal hands. It is not much, but it has a stove and a decent bed. If you wanted to stay on and help with the winter work, we could offer room and board, plus a small wage. The words hung in the air for a moment. Thomas stared at her like she had grown a second head, his face reddening. Nora, a word, in private. She followed him out onto the porch, her heart hammering. She knew she had overstepped, had made an offer that was not hers to make, but something in her had refused to let James Sutton just ride out of their lives. What do you think you are doing? Thomas hissed once they were out of earshot. We do not have money to hire help. We need help, Thomas. You know we do. We are barely keeping up as it is, and winter is coming. The roof needs repairs. The barn door has been sticking, and we still have not finished cutting enough firewood. Nora kept her voice low and steady, even though she was shaking. He is a good worker. You said so yourself. That is not the point, Thomas said, but she could see the calculation in his eyes. He knew she was right about needing help. What do you know about this man? He could be anyone. Could be running from the law for all we know. Does he seem like he is running from the law? Nora met her brother's gaze steadily. He seems like an honest man who needs work, and we need help. It makes sense, Thomas. Her brother was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he sighed. Fine, but he stays in the bunkhouse, and you keep your distance. Last thing we need is you making cow eyes at some drifter and getting your heart broken, or worse. The words stung, the implication that she was foolish and naive, but Nora just nodded. I understand. When they returned inside, James was clearing the dishes from the table, stacking them carefully by the wash basin. He looked up as they entered, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Sutton, Thomas said formally, my sister made you an offer without consulting me first, but I have decided to agree to it. We can offer you room in the bunkhouse, 3 meals a day, and $3 a week through the winter. In exchange, you will help with all ranch work as needed. If that is acceptable to you, you can start tomorrow. Something shifted in James's expression, a relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. That is more than acceptable, Mr. Preston. You have my word I will work hard and earn my keep. See that you do, Thomas said gruffly. Nora will show you to the bunkhouse. She grabbed a lantern and led James out into the cool evening air. across the yard to the small wooden structure that stood about 50 yards from the main house. It had been empty since their father died, dusty and cold, but she had kept it relatively clean out of habit. "I apologize for the condition," she said, lighting the lamp inside to reveal a simple room with a narrow bed, a potbelly stove, a small table and chair, and some hooks on the wall for clothes. "I can bring you some blankets and firewood." "This is perfect, Miss Preston. Better than I have had in months." James set his saddlebags down on the bed and looked around with evident satisfaction. "You did not have to do this. Offer me work, I mean. But I am grateful you did." "We really do need the help," Nora said, though they both knew it was more than that. "And you were kind today. That story you told about your sister. I think you knew exactly what you were doing." James turned to face her fully, and in the lamplight, his eyes were impossibly blue and sincere. "I meant every word I said, and I could see you were carrying a burden that no one should have to carry alone. Your brother, forgive me for saying so, seems determined to make you pay for something that was not your fault." "You do not know what happened," Nora said quietly, but without heat. "You do not know what I did. I know that you were 14 years old and wanted to go to a dance. I know that pneumonia kills quickly and unpredictably. And I know that blaming yourself for 8 years has not brought your mother back or made anything better." He took a step closer, his voice gentle. "I also know that you deserve better than to spend the rest of your life in penance for being a child who made a child's choice." Tears burned in Nora's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "I should let you get settled. I will bring those blankets." She fled before he could say anything else, before the kindness in his voice could break down the last of her defenses. Back in the house, she gathered blankets and quilts from the linen chest, her hands moving automatically while her mind spun with 1,000 thoughts and feelings she had kept locked away for too long. Thomas was already in his room when she carried the blankets back out to the bunkhouse. James had lit the stove and was arranging his few possessions on the table. He smiled when she entered, taking the blankets from her arms. "Thank you, Miss Preston, for everything." "Nora," she said impulsively. "You can call me Nora. If we are going to be working together all winter, we might as well not be so formal." "Nora," he repeated, and something about the way he said her name made her heart skip. "Then you should call me James. Or just Jim, if you prefer. Most folks do." "James suits you better," she said, and then felt foolish for saying something so personal. "I should go. Breakfast is at sunrise." "I will be there," he promised. She walked back to the house feeling like the ground beneath her feet had shifted somehow, like the world was rearranging itself into new and unfamiliar patterns. In her room, she lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking about blue eyes and kind words, and the dangerous possibility that maybe, just maybe, she had suffered enough. The next morning dawned cold and clear, with frost sparkling on the prairie grass. Nora was up before sunrise, as always, stoking the kitchen fire and preparing breakfast. She made extra eggs and bacon, fresh biscuits, and strong coffee, telling herself it was just because they had a ranch hand to feed now, and not because she wanted to make a good impression. James arrived exactly at sunrise, his face freshly washed and his hair still damp. "Morning, Nora. Something smells wonderful." Thomas came in a moment later, already scowling. "You will be helping me repair the barn door this morning, Sutton. Then we need to ride out and check on the cattle, make sure none have wandered off. After that, we will start on the firewood." "Sounds good to me," James said cheerfully, accepting the plate Nora handed him. "What about you, Nora? What are your tasks for the day?" The question seemed to surprise Thomas, who looked at James with confusion. "What does it matter what she does? She has got her own work. Cooking, cleaning, mending, women's work." "I was just making conversation," James said mildly. "Seems like Nora is as much a part of running this ranch as you are." It was such a small thing, that acknowledgement of her contribution, but it made something warm bloom in Nora's chest. Thomas just grunted and focused on his food, but she caught James's eye across the table and allowed herself a tiny smile of gratitude. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. James proved to be as good as his word, working tirelessly from dawn until dusk. He repaired the barn door, patched the roof, cut and stacked cords of firewood, and rode out daily to check on their small herd of cattle. He was patient with Thomas's gruff orders and suspicious nature, never pushing back, but never deferring unnecessarily either. And he was kind to Nora in ways that made her nervous and hopeful all at once. He thanked her for every meal, complimented her cooking genuinely, and asked her opinion on ranch matters when Thomas was not around. He helped her carry water from the well without being asked, fixed the pump when it started sticking, and once carved her a new handle for her bread knife when the old one cracked. 2 weeks after James's arrival, Nora was hanging laundry when he rode back from checking the cattle earlier than expected. He dismounted quickly, his expression troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked, abandoning the clothesline. "Found some tracks near the north boundary. Looks like someone has been cutting through our land regularly. Might be nothing, might be rustlers scouting." He looped his horse's reins over the fence rail. "Where is Thomas? I should tell him." "He rode into town for supplies. He will not be back until evening." Nora felt a flutter of worry. "Do you think we are in danger?" "Hard to say. Tracks were a few days old at least." James pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "We should probably keep a closer eye out, though. Maybe I should sleep in the barn for a while, be closer to the cattle." "You do not have to do that," Nora protested. "The bunkhouse has a good view of the barn. You would see if anyone approached." James smiled at her concern. "You worried about me, Nora Preston?" The teasing note in his voice made her blush. "I would be worried about anyone sleeping in a drafty barn when they have a perfectly good stove in the bunkhouse." "Fair enough." He settled his hat back on his head. "But I will start doing night checks, just to be safe. You should tell Thomas when he gets back." "I will." She hesitated, then added, "You are good at this, you know. Taking care of things, looking out for problems before they become serious." "Just doing my job," James said, but she could see the pleasure her words gave him. "Though I admit I am finding I like it here more than I expected. You and your brother have a good operation, and the company is not bad either." He winked at her before leading his horse toward the barn, leaving Nora standing by the clothesline with her heart racing and her cheeks warm despite the cold air. That evening, when she told Thomas about the tracks, his reaction was immediate and predictable. "This is why we cannot trust drifters. How do we know Sutton is not the one who has been scouting our land? Could be setting us up for his friends to come rob us blind." "James is not a thief," Nora said firmly. "He was the one who found the tracks and reported them to us. If he were part of a rustling operation, why would he do that? To throw us off the scent, make us think he is trustworthy right before they strike." Thomas paced the kitchen, agitated. "I knew this was a bad idea. Knew we should not have let him stay." "You are being paranoid," Nora said, surprising herself with her boldness. "James has worked hard for us every single day. He has given us no reason to distrust him." Thomas rounded on her, his eyes flashing. "And there it is. I knew this would happen. You have developed feelings for him. Have not you, stupid girl? You think some smooth-talking cowboy is going to save you from the life you deserve?" The cruelty of the words made Nora flinch, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "This is not about my feelings. This is about you being unwilling to trust anyone or admit that we needed help." "We would not need help if you had been a proper daughter," Thomas shot back. "If Ma had lived, she would have managed the house and you could have helped Pa with the ranch work. We would have built this place into something real, but instead we are limping along, barely surviving, all because you could not be bothered to stay home one night." The familiar accusation should have driven Nora from the room as it always did, but something had changed in her over the past 2 weeks. James's words about carrying burdens alone, about honoring the dead by living well, had planted seeds of doubt in the guilt that had defined her for so long. I was 14, Thomas, she said quietly. I was a child who wanted to go to a dance. I did not know Ma would get worse so quickly. None of us did. The doctor said even if he had been there from the start, he probably could not have saved her. The doctor said that to make us feel better, Thomas snapped. But I know the truth, and you know it too. That is why you have never argued with me before, why you have accepted your punishment all these years. Because deep down, you know I am right. Nora felt something crack open inside her chest, some dam that had been holding back years of pain and anger and grief. No, Thomas, I accepted it because I was a child who felt guilty, and you were my older brother, who I looked up to. I accepted it because I had just lost my mother, and I could not bear to lose you too by fighting with you. I accepted it because I did not know how to stand up for myself. Thomas stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. So now you are going to stand up for yourself? After 8 years? Because some cowboy smiled at you? Because I am tired, Nora said, and her voice cracked with the weight of exhaustion. I am so tired of carrying this guilt, Thomas. I am tired of apologizing for being human, for making a mistake when I was just a child. I miss Ma every single day, and I am sorry she died, but I cannot keep letting you punish me for it. It is killing me just as surely as the pneumonia killed her. For a moment, something flickered in Thomas's eyes that might have been understanding, or perhaps recognition of how far he had pushed her. But then his face hardened again. You are being dramatic. No one is killing you. You have a roof over your head, food to eat, and work that gives you purpose. That is more than a lot of people have. That is survival, not living, Nora said softly. And Ma would not have wanted either of us to just survive. She would have wanted us to be happy. Thomas turned away from her, his shoulders rigid. Get out of my sight, and stay away from Sutton. I mean it, Nora. He works for us. Nothing more. Nora left the house feeling shaken but somehow lighter. She had stood up to Thomas, had finally said out loud the things that had been building inside her for years. It had not changed his mind, but it had changed something in her. She found herself walking toward the bunkhouse without consciously deciding to, drawn by the warm light glowing in the window. She knocked softly, half hoping James would not hear and she could turn back. But the door opened almost immediately, and James stood there in his shirt sleeves, his hair mussed and his eyes concerned. Nora, is everything all right? I just argued with Thomas, she said. And then to her horror, she started crying. Not delicate tears, but great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her bones. Oh, Nora. James pulled her inside without hesitation, guiding her to sit on the edge of his bed while he crouched in front of her. What happened? What did he say to you? Through broken breaths, she told him everything. About the tracks, about Thomas's accusations, about finally confronting her brother after 8 years of silence. James listened without interrupting, his hand warm and steady on her shoulder. When she finally ran out of words, he handed her a handkerchief and sat beside her on the bed. I am proud of you, he said simply. That took real courage. It did not change anything, Nora said miserably. He still blames me. He still thinks I deserve to be punished. But you stood up for yourself. You said what needed to be said. That matters, Nora. Even if Thomas cannot see it yet, you have changed something important. James was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? She nodded, not trusting her voice. I see a woman who has carried an unfair burden with grace and dignity. I see someone who works harder than anyone I have ever met, who gives everything she has to a brother who has not earned her devotion. I see kindness and strength and a goodness that has somehow survived 8 years of being told she is not enough. His blue eyes held hers steadily. I see someone worth knowing, worth caring about, worth fighting for. James, Nora whispered, overwhelmed by the intensity of his words. I know I have only been here 2 weeks. I know I am just a ranch hand with no prospects and no right to say these things. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. He took her hand gently. You matter, Nora, not because of what you can do for other people, but because of who you are. And anyone who cannot see that is a fool. Something broke loose in Nora's chest, some last barrier she had been keeping around her heart. She looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray, and she let herself believe, for the first time in 8 years, that maybe she did deserve kindness. I care about you too, she said softly. I did not want to. I tried not to, but I do. James smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. Then we will figure this out together. Whatever Thomas says, whatever happens, you are not alone anymore. I will help you carry this burden for as long as you need me to. That could be a long time, Nora said, managing a watery laugh. Good, James said simply. I was hoping it would be. He walked her back to the house in the moonlight, their hands clasped together like a promise. At the door, he squeezed her fingers gently and waited until she was safely inside before heading back to the bunkhouse. Nora lay in bed that night feeling like she had stepped off a cliff and discovered she could fly. The fear was still there, the guilt and the grief that had been her companions for so long. But now there was something else too, something warm and bright and hopeful. The next few weeks were tense. Thomas barely spoke to James and treated Nora with cold formality. He assigned them tasks that would keep them apart, sent James on long rides to check fences while keeping Nora busy with endless household chores. But he could not stop the glances they exchanged when passing in the yard or the way Nora's face lit up when James returned each evening. As November deepened into early December, the first real snow came, blanketing the prairie in white. James and Thomas worked together to bring the cattle closer to the barn where they could be more easily fed and monitored. The work was hard and cold, and even Thomas had to admit that having an extra pair of hands made the difference between manageable and disastrous. One particularly bitter evening, Nora was preparing supper when she heard raised voices from the yard. She rushed to the window to see Thomas and James facing off near the barn, their breath clouding in the frozen air. She grabbed her shawl and ran outside, her boots crunching in the snow. As she got closer, she could hear Thomas's angry words. I saw how you looked at her in town today. Everyone saw. You're making her look like a fool, carrying on with a hired hand, making our whole family look low class. I looked at her like a man looks at a woman he respects and cares for, James said, his voice calm but firm. And if that makes me low class in your eyes, then I will wear that label proudly. You do not care for her. You are just looking for a way to get your hands on this ranch. Probably figured out that if you sweet-talk Nora enough, she might marry you and you could claim half of everything. Stop it, Thomas, Nora said, stepping between them. That is enough. Stay out of this, Nora. This is between me and the hired help. Thomas's face was red with anger and cold. He is using you. Can you not see that? No, he is not, Nora said firmly. James has been nothing but honest and kind. The only person who has been using me is you, Thomas. Using my guilt to control me, to keep me working like a servant in my own home. Your own home? Thomas laughed bitterly. This is my home. I am the eldest. I inherited it from Pa. You are here because I allow it. The words hit Nora like a slap, but she did not back down. Then maybe I should leave. Maybe I should stop allowing you to make me miserable just because you cannot forgive yourself for not being home when Ma got sick. Thomas went very still. What did you say? You heard me. Nora's voice was shaking but determined. You blame me because it is easier than admitting the truth. You were 20 years old, Thomas. You were out drinking at the saloon with your friends that night. Pa had to ride into town to drag you home, and by then it was too late. You were not there either. But somehow, it is all my fault because I was 14 and wanted to go to a dance. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing. Thomas stared at his sister with an expression of such shock and pain that Nora almost took the words back. I never, Thomas started, then stopped. Pa said. Pa said it was not anyone's fault, that Ma got sick too fast for anyone to have stopped it. But you did not want to believe him. Nora felt tears freezing on her cheeks. So you made me the villain of the story. Because if it was my fault, then it could not be yours. Thomas turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the darkness beyond the barn. Nora stood frozen, watching him go, terrified by what she had done. You told him the truth, James said quietly, putting his arm around her shoulders. That was brave. He is never going to forgive me now, Nora whispered. Maybe. Or maybe you just gave him the chance to finally start healing. James turned her gently to face him. Either way, you did the right thing. You cannot carry his guilt along with your own anymore. They stood together in the snowy yard while the night deepened around them. Eventually, Nora returned to the house to salvage what she could of supper, but Thomas did not come back to eat. His bedroom door remained closed, and when she knocked to tell him food was ready, he told her through the door to leave him alone. She ate a quiet meal with James in the kitchen, both of them subdued. What if he kicks you out? Nora asked. What if he tells you to leave because of what I said? Then I will find work somewhere nearby, and we will figure things out, James said with quiet certainty. I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to, Nora. I meant what I said about helping you carry this. Why? The question burst from her before she could stop it. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. James set down his fork and looked at her with such open honesty that it made her heart ache. Because I know what it is like to be slowly destroyed by guilt you do not deserve to carry. Because I see in you the kind of strength and goodness that I want to spend my life protecting. Because when I look at you, I see my future if you will have me. Nora could not speak around the lump in her throat. She reached across the table and took his hand, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned upside down. Thomas did not emerge from his room that night or the next morning. Nora left breakfast outside his door and went about her chores with a heavy heart. James worked quietly around the ranch, keeping busy but staying close in case he was needed. It was late afternoon when Thomas finally appeared. He looked haggard, like he had not slept at all. Nora was in the kitchen preparing supper when he came in and sat heavily at the table. I remember that night, he said without preamble, his voice hoarse. I had forgotten the details, or maybe I made myself forget them. But you are right, I was at the saloon. Pa came to get me, and he was angry. Angrier than I had ever seen him. He said Ma needed me, that I was the man of the house when he was gone, and I had responsibilities. Nora set down the knife she was holding and turned to face her brother. By the time we got back, you were already there. You had come home from the church social because you had a feeling something was wrong. You were sitting by Ma's bed, holding her hand, begging her to wake up. Thomas's voice cracked, and I just stood there, drunk and useless while she died. While Pa looked at me like he did not know who I was. Thomas, Nora said softly, moving to sit across from him at the table. After the funeral, Pa took me aside. He said that I needed to straighten up, that losing Ma was not an excuse to lose myself too. He said we all had to pull together as a family. And I tried, Nora. I swear I tried. But every time I looked at you, I saw how you had been there when I was not. How you were a better son to him than I ever was, even though you were his daughter. That is not true, Nora protested. Or it is. Thomas wiped roughly at his eyes. So I made it your fault. I told myself the story over and over until I believed it, until I could look at myself in the mirror without hating what I saw. I took my guilt and my shame, and I put it all on you because you were younger and softer and you would not fight back. I should have fought back sooner, Nora said. No, Thomas shook his head firmly. You should not have had to fight at all. I am your brother. I was supposed to protect you, to take care of you after Ma and Pa were gone. Instead, I made you into my servant and my scapegoat. I stole 8 years of your life because I could not face my own failures. The tears were flowing freely down both their faces now. Nora reached across the table and took her brother's hands. We both made mistakes that night, Thomas. We were both young and foolish, but it was not our fault that Ma died. It was just something terrible that happened, and we have to find a way to forgive ourselves and each other. I do not know how to do that, Thomas said, his voice breaking. I do not know how to let go of the anger. It has been holding me together for so long. One day at a time, Nora said. That is all we can do. One day at a time. They sat together at the kitchen table as the winter light faded outside, holding hands and crying for their mother and their lost years and the family they might have been if grief had not twisted them into knots. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. That night, Thomas came to the door of the bunkhouse where James was reading by lamplight. Sutton, can we talk? James set down his book and stood, wary but respectful. Of course. Thomas stepped inside, looking uncomfortable. I owe you an apology. I have been treating you poorly, and you did not deserve it. You have been a good worker and a good man, and I let my own demons make me suspicious of you. I understand, Mr. Preston. You were trying to protect your sister. I was not protecting her. I was controlling her. There is a difference. Thomas met James's eyes directly. Nora told me how you have been helping her, not just with the work, but with carrying the burden I put on her. That is more than I deserved, and more than I had any right to expect from a stranger. Nora is not a burden to me, James said quietly. She is the best thing that has happened to me in a long time. Thomas nodded slowly. I can see that. I can see how you look at her and how she looks at you. It is how Sarah used to look at me before everything went wrong. His expression tightened with pain at the mention of his late wife. I do not want Nora to end up like Sarah did, dying in childbirth and alone because I was too busy working to be there when she needed me. I would never let that happen, James said with quiet intensity. If Nora will have me, I will spend my life making sure she knows she is valued and loved and supported. She will never be alone again. Thomas studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Then I guess I should say welcome to the family, Sutton, though you are probably getting a worse deal than you realize. James shook his hand firmly. I will take my chances. As winter deepened, the ranch fell into a new rhythm. Thomas was still gruff and often moody, but the sharp edge of cruelty was gone from his words. He spoke to Nora with a careful respect, like he was learning to know her again as a person rather than a target for his anger. And he worked alongside James with something approaching friendship, sharing the labor of keeping the ranch running through the harsh Wyoming winter. Christmas came quietly. Nora cooked a special dinner, and they invited James to eat with them at the house. It was the first holiday in years that did not feel weighted down with grief and resentment. Thomas even managed to smile when James gave Nora a small wooden box he had carved with her initials, perfect for keeping her sewing supplies. I have something for you too, Nora said to James, suddenly shy. She handed him a package wrapped in brown paper, and when he opened it, he found a thick woolen scarf she had knitted in shades of blue that matched his eyes. It is perfect, James said, winding it around his neck immediately. Thank you, Nora. The look that passed between them made Thomas clear his throat uncomfortably. Well, I suppose this is as good a time as any to say what I have been thinking. James, you have more than earned your keep here. Come spring, I would like to make you a permanent partner in the ranch. A third share, legal and binding. Both Nora and James stared at him in shock. Thomas, you do not have to do that, James said. I know I do not have to. I want to. Thomas looked down at his plate. This ranch needs young blood and fresh ideas if it is going to survive. And I figure if you and Nora are going to get married eventually, might as well make it official that you have a stake in the place. Nora felt her face flame red. Thomas, we have not talked about marriage. Then you should, Thomas said bluntly. You are 22 years old, Nora. You have wasted enough of your life being miserable. If James makes you happy, then marry him and have a dozen babies and fill this house with the noise and chaos that Ma always wanted. The casual mention of their mother, without bitterness or blame, made Nora's eyes well with tears. She looked at James and saw her own emotion reflected in his face. That evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, James asked Nora to walk with him despite the cold. They bundled into coats and scarves and stepped out into a world transformed by snow and moonlight. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, pristine and peaceful. Your brother is right, you know, James said as they walked toward the barn. I have been thinking about marriage since about the second week I was here, but I did not want to rush you or make you feel pressured. I have been thinking about it too, Nora admitted, but it seemed too good to be true. Like if I let myself hope for it, something would go wrong. James stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Nora Preston, I know I am just a cowboy with more experience with cattle than I have money in the bank. I know I came here as a drifter looking for work, and by rights you should have sent me packing after one day. But somehow you saw something in me worth keeping around. And I saw in you a woman worth building a life with. James, Nora whispered, her heart feeling too big for her chest. Will you marry me? He asked simply. Will you let me spend the rest of my life helping you carry whatever burdens come our way? Will you let me wake up every morning knowing I get to see your face and hear your voice and work beside you building something good and real? Yes, Nora said, the word coming out as a sob. Yes, of course, yes. James pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing against her cheek. They stood together in the snow, two people who had found each other against all odds, and Nora felt the weight of 8 years of guilt finally begin to lift from her shoulders. They were married in March, as soon as the weather cleared enough for the circuit preacher to make it out to Cheyenne. It was a small ceremony at the church in town, with Thomas standing up as a witness alongside the Richardsons from the neighboring ranch. Nora wore a simple blue dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit, and James wore his best shirt, with his hair neatly combed and his eyes shining with joy. The night before the wedding, Thomas had pulled Nora aside. I wish Ma could be here to see this, he said quietly. She would have liked James, and she would have been proud of the woman you have become, despite everything I did to try and break you. She would have been proud of you too, Nora said, for finding your way back to being my brother instead of my jailer. I am trying, Thomas said. It is not easy letting go of anger when it has been your closest companion for so long. But I am trying, Nora, for Ma's memory, and for you, and maybe even for myself. They had embraced then, the first time in years, and Nora had felt another piece of the broken places in her heart begin to heal. James moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse into Nora's room in the main house, and they began their married life with a sense of quiet joy that felt almost miraculous. Thomas had meant what he said about making James a partner, and they had papers drawn up officially splitting the ranch 3 ways. Technically, this means you own more of the ranch than I do now, Thomas had pointed out. Since you and James together have 2/3, it is still your home, Thomas, Nora said firmly. That will never change. We are family. Spring turned to summer, and the ranch thrived under the management of 3 people working together instead of 2 working in opposition. They bought additional cattle with money they saved from the winter, repaired and expanded the barn, and even hired a young man from town to help with the heaviest work during the busy season. Nora had never been happier. She woke each morning to James's arms around her and fell asleep each night listening to him talk about his dreams for their future. He made her laugh with stories about his cowboy days, held her when nightmares about her mother still occasionally troubled her sleep, and never once made her feel like she was anything less than precious to him. In August, Nora realized she was pregnant. She told James first, on a warm evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had lifted her clear off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We're going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "You and me, Nora. We're going to have a baby." Thomas was almost as excited when they told him. "Ma would have loved being a grandmother," he said, and there was sadness in his voice, but also genuine happiness. "I will help however I can, and we will make sure you have the best doctor in Wyoming when the time comes." "I will be fine," Nora said, though she felt a flutter of fear. Childbirth had taken Thomas's wife Sarah and took countless other women every year. "Women have babies all the time." "Not my wife," James said firmly, pulling her close. "My wife is going to have the best care and all the support she needs, and she is going to be just fine because I refuse to consider any other outcome." His absolute certainty was comforting, even if Nora knew that determination alone could not guarantee safety. But she chose to believe him, chose to have faith that they had been through too much and fought too hard to have their happiness snatched away now. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Nora felt well and strong, continuing to do her normal work around the ranch, even as her belly grew. James was constantly worried about her overexerting herself, but she laughed at his concern. "I am pregnant, not broken," she would tell him. "Women have been doing ranch work while pregnant since ranches existed." "Other women are not you," he would reply, which never failed to make her heart melt. In December, as snow once again blanketed the prairie, Nora went into labor. The doctor arrived from town and set up in the bedroom while James paced the kitchen and Thomas tried to distract him with checkers. The labor was long and painful, lasting through the night and into the next morning. But when Nora finally gave birth to a healthy baby boy, just as the sun was rising, every moment of pain was forgotten in the rush of love that overwhelmed her. "He is perfect," James whispered, cradling his son with tears streaming down his face. "You are perfect. Thank you, Nora. Thank you for this gift." They named him Samuel, after James's father, and called him Sam. Thomas held his nephew with surprising gentleness and declared him to be the finest boy in all of Wyoming. The house that had been so quiet and cold for so many years was suddenly filled with the sounds of a baby, with crying and cooing and late-night lullabies. Nora had never imagined she could be this happy. Every time she looked at Sam, at his tiny perfect features, and the way he grabbed onto James's finger with his whole hand, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the second chance she had been given at life. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked James one night when Sam was a few months old. They were lying in bed together, the baby sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. "If you had not stopped at our ranch that day, if I had not offered you work—" "All the time," James admitted, pulling her closer. "And every time I think about it, I am grateful for whatever fate or providence or plain luck brought me here. I was drifting, Nora. I had been drifting for years, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. And then I met you, and suddenly I understood what I had been searching for all along. Home," Nora said softly. "No," James corrected gently. "You. You were what I was searching for. Home is just wherever you are." As Sam grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They expanded their herd, built a new barn, and even started growing some crops in the most fertile sections of their land. Thomas hired a young woman from town named Margaret to help Nora with the housework and cooking, and after 6 months of working together, he asked her to marry him. Margaret was a good match for Thomas, practical and kind, with a no-nonsense attitude that suited his personality. Her presence seemed to soften the last of the rough edges that grief had left on him. They were married in the spring of 1885, 3 years after James and Nora, and Margaret moved into the ranch house with them. "It is getting crowded in here," James observed one evening, as they were all gathered around the dinner table, Sam chattering happily in his high chair while Thomas and Margaret discussed plans for a garden. "Too crowded?" Nora asked with a smile. "No, not too crowded. Just right crowded, the way a family home should be." James looked around the table with satisfaction. "Ma would have loved this," he said, and everyone knew he meant not just the full house, but the love that filled it, the forgiveness and healing that had replaced the grief and blame. In 1886, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Claire, after James's mother. She was small and fierce from the moment she entered the world, with dark curls and blue eyes that saw everything. Sam was enchanted with his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feeding times. Margaret also became pregnant that same year, and she and Thomas welcomed twin boys in early 1887. The ranch house rang with the sounds of children playing, crying, laughing. It was chaos and noise and everything their mother would have wanted for her children. One evening in the summer of 1887, Nora found herself standing in the same spot by the window where she had stood 5 years earlier, watching the prairie grass bend in the wind. But everything had changed. She was no longer alone, no longer burdened by crushing guilt, no longer convinced she deserved only punishment and sorrow. James came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About how 5 years ago I was standing right here believing my life was over, believing I would never be anything except a disappointment and a failure." She leaned back against his chest. "And then you rode up asking about our fence posts, and everything changed. I did not change you, Nora. I just helped you see what was already there. Your strength, your worth, your capacity for love and forgiveness. That was all you." He kissed the side of her neck softly. "I just got lucky enough to be there when you finally let yourself believe it." Outside, they could hear Sam and Thomas's twins playing some elaborate game that involved a lot of running and shouting. Margaret was hanging laundry while singing to baby Claire, who was strapped to her back in a sling. The scene was so perfectly ordinary, so beautifully domestic, that Nora felt her eyes fill with tears. "What is wrong?" James asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing," Nora said, smiling through her tears. "Absolutely nothing is wrong. I am just happy, James. After all these years of carrying sadness and guilt, I almost do not know what to do with happiness." "You live it," James said simply. "You wake up every morning and you choose to believe that you deserve good things. You love your children and your husband and your brother. You keep building this life we have made together. And when the hard days come, because they will come, you remember that you are not alone anymore. You have me, and I will always help you carry whatever burden you face. Promise?" Nora asked, even though she knew he would. "Promise," James said, turning her in his arms to face him. "For all the rest of our days, Nora Sutton, I will be right here beside you, helping you carry whatever comes our way." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Nora let herself believe in the life they had built together. Let herself believe that she was worthy of love and happiness and forgiveness. Let herself believe that her mother, wherever she was, would be proud of the woman she had become and the family she had helped create. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Thomas knocked on their bedroom door. "Can I talk to you both for a minute?" They followed him out to the porch, where the summer night was warm and full of cricket song. Thomas leaned against the railing, his expression thoughtful in the moonlight. I have been thinking a lot lately about Ma, about what she would say if she could see us now. He looked at Nora directly. She would tell me I was a fool for wasting 8 years blaming you for something that was not your fault. She would probably take a wooden spoon to my backside for being such a cruel brother. Nora smiled despite herself. Their mother had been known for her quick justice with a wooden spoon, but she would also tell me that what matters is not the mistakes we made, but what we do after we recognize them. And I hope, Nora, that you can see I am trying, that I am doing my best to be the brother you deserved all along. I can see that, Thomas, Nora said softly, and I am proud of you, of how far you have come, of the family you have built with Margaret. Ma would be proud too. Thomas nodded, his throat working. I just wanted you to know that I am grateful for your forgiveness, which I do not deserve, for staying here even when I made your life miserable, for bringing James into our lives and showing me that family is not about perfection, it is about choosing to love each other despite our failures. Come here, Nora said, opening her arms. Thomas came to her and they embraced, a real brother and sister embrace, full of forgiveness and love and hope for the future. James watched them with shining eyes, and when they separated, he clapped Thomas on the shoulder. We are family now, all of us. That is what matters, and we will make sure our children grow up knowing that love is stronger than guilt, that forgiveness is possible, and that every person deserves a second chance. The years that followed were full and rich. Nora and James had 2 more children, another boy they named Daniel, and a daughter they named Catherine. Thomas and Margaret had another daughter of their own. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the Cheyenne area. Sam grew into a strong, thoughtful boy who loved working alongside his father and uncle. Claire was adventurous and fearless, always leading the younger children in elaborate games and expeditions. The house was never quiet, never still, always full of the beautiful chaos of a large and loving family. As Nora approached her 30th birthday in 1890, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place. The guilt she had carried for so long was not completely gone. She did not think that was possible. Her mother's death would always be a source of sorrow, but it no longer defined her. It no longer controlled her choices or convinced her that she was unworthy of love. James had helped her see that carrying grief was different from being crushed by it, that remembering someone you loved did not require punishing yourself forever, that the best way to honor the dead was to live fully and love fiercely and create the kind of family that would have made them proud. On her birthday, James surprised her with a picnic at the spot where they had first talked about their feelings, near the north pasture where he had repaired those fence posts so many years ago. They sat on a blanket in the summer sun, watching their children play nearby while they ate fried chicken and fresh bread and strawberry pie. Do you remember what I said to you the night you first came to the bunkhouse? James asked, taking her hand. When you were crying about your fight with Thomas? You said a lot of things that night, Nora replied, smiling. I said I would help you carry your burden for as long as you needed me to. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I want you to know that I meant it then, and I mean it now. For the rest of our lives, Nora. Whatever you face, whatever challenges come our way, I will be right here beside you, helping you carry it all. I know, Nora said, leaning her head on his shoulder. And I want you to know that you already have. You helped me carry that unfair burden until it became light enough that I could set it down. You loved me when I could not love myself. You showed me that I deserved forgiveness and happiness and a life full of joy. You saved me, James. No, James said firmly, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. We saved each other. I was drifting and alone, and you gave me a home and a purpose and a reason to stay. We found each other when we both needed it most, and we built something beautiful together. He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of the love that had grown between them over 8 years of marriage. Around them, their children's laughter rang out across the prairie, and in the distance, Nora could see Thomas and Margaret walking hand in hand toward them, bringing more food and blankets for their extended picnic. This was her life now, not the half-life of guilt and penance she had resigned herself to, but a full and rich existence filled with love and laughter and the everyday miracles of family. Her mother's death would always be a part of her story, would always be a source of sadness, but it was no longer the only part, no longer the defining chapter. James Sutton had ridden onto her ranch on an autumn day in 1882, offering to repair a fence in exchange for a meal. He had stayed to help her repair so much more than fence posts. He had helped her repair her relationship with her brother, her faith in herself, her belief that she deserved to be happy. He had loved her when she was broken and stayed beside her as she healed, never asking for anything except the chance to be part of her life. And she had loved him back with everything she had, giving him the home and family he had been searching for, building a life together that honored both their pasts while embracing their future. As the sun began to set over the Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Nora looked around at her family, gathered together on the land her father had built and her mother had loved. She felt her mother's presence in the laughter of her children, in the warmth of the summer evening, in the love that surrounded her on all sides. "Thank you, Ma," she whispered, so softly that only James could hear. "Thank you for teaching me about love and strength and the importance of family. I hope I am making you proud." James squeezed her hand, understanding without needing to be told what she was feeling. "She is proud," he said with quiet certainty. "I am sure of it. How could she not be when you look at what you have created here? This is exactly what she would have wanted for you, for all of us." As darkness fell, and they gathered up their children to head back to the house, Nora felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The burden she had carried for so long was finally completely lifted. She was free to be simply herself, a woman who had made mistakes and survived grief and found love in the most unexpected place. She was free to be Nora Sutton, wife and mother and sister and partner, free to laugh without guilt, to love without reservation, to build a future without being chained to the past. And she had James to thank for that, this cowboy who had appeared when she needed him most and chosen to stay for all the years that followed. They walked back to the ranch house together as a family, all of them, their voices carrying across the prairie in the soft summer night. And Nora knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, living fully, loving fiercely, and helping to create a legacy of forgiveness and healing that would echo through generations. The past would always be part of her story, but it would never again be the whole story. She had James beside her, children running ahead of them, a brother who had finally learned to be a brother again, and a future full of possibility stretching out before them like the endless Wyoming sky. In the years that followed, that future unfolded in ways both expected and surprising. The ranch continued to thrive, growing from a small family operation to one of the most respected cattle operations in Wyoming. Sam took over more and more responsibility as he grew into a young man, working alongside his father and uncle with skill and dedication. Claire proved to have a gift for working with horses, training them with a patience and intuition that amazed everyone who watched her work. The younger children added their own gifts to the family enterprise. Daniel had a head for numbers and helped manage the ranch's finances, while Catherine inherited her mother's gift for healing and began studying with the doctor in Cheyenne, learning to care for both people and animals. Thomas and Margaret's children grew strong and capable as well, and the two families remained close, their children more like siblings than cousins. The ranch house was expanded twice to accommodate everyone comfortably, and the sound of multiple generations living and working together became the heartbeat of the Preston Sutton Ranch. In 1895, when Nora was 35 and James was 38, They celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary by taking a rare trip, just the two of them, leaving the children in Thomas and Margaret's capable hands for a week. They traveled to Denver, staying in a hotel and eating in restaurants and enjoying the luxury of time alone together. 13 years, James mused as they sat together in their hotel room, looking out over the city lights. Feels like both forever, and no time at all. I know what you mean, Nora said, leaning against him. Sometimes I still feel like that frightened girl standing by the chicken coop, too scared to hope for anything better. And then I remember everything we have built together, and I can hardly believe it is real. It is real, James assured her, wrapping his arms around her. Every single beautiful, chaotic, exhausting, wonderful moment of it, and I would not change a single thing, except maybe I would have found you sooner, given us more years together. We have all the years that matter, Nora said, the ones ahead of us, and the ones we fill with love and family and the life we chose to build. They returned home to find the children had managed perfectly well without them, though everyone agreed it was nice to have them back. The ranch felt complete again with all of them together, and Nora was reminded once more that this was what her mother had always wanted, a house full of love and laughter and the sound of family. As the century turned and the new 1900s began, bringing with them changes and challenges that no one could have predicted, the Preston Sutton family faced them together. There were hard years when drought threatened their cattle, and difficult seasons when prices dropped and money was tight. There were illnesses and accidents and all the normal trials that come with living and working on a ranch in the harsh Wyoming climate. But through it all, they had each other. Thomas and James worked side by side, their early animosity transformed into genuine brotherhood. Margaret and Nora became closer than sisters, raising their children together and supporting each other through every trial. And the children grew up knowing they were loved and valued, that their family was a place of safety and acceptance, no matter what challenges the outside world might bring. On a spring evening in 1902, Nora found herself once again standing by the kitchen window, looking out at the prairie that had been her home for her entire life. She was 42 now, her dark hair showing threads of silver, her face lined with the marks of time and laughter and the honest work of a life well lived. James came up behind her, still moving with the easy grace of a cowboy, despite the fact that he was 45 now. He wrapped his arms around her waist, a gesture so familiar and comforting that Nora melted into it without thought. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his breath warm against her neck. "About that girl I used to be," Nora said. About how she was standing right here 20 years ago, believing her life was over before it had really begun, and about how wrong she was. "Not wrong," James corrected gently. "Just waiting. Waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right reason to start living again." "You were that reason," Nora said, turning in his arms to face him. "You were the person who taught me that I deserved to be happy. That my mother's death was not my fault. That I could forgive myself and my brother and build something beautiful from the ashes of all that grief." "We both did that," James said. "Together. Just like we promised we would." Through the window, they could see their oldest children working in the barn, their voices carrying across the yard. Sam was 20 years old now, tall and strong like his father, with Nora's dark hair and quick smile. Claire was 17, beautiful and fierce and already drawing the attention of young men from neighboring ranches, much to James's dismay. "They are good children," Nora said, watching them with a mother's pride. "All of them, strong and kind, and ready to face whatever the world brings them." "Because they come from good parents," James replied. "Because they grew up seeing what it looks like when people choose love over bitterness, forgiveness over revenge, hope over despair. You taught them that, Nora. You and Thomas both, by refusing to let grief define your whole lives." "I could not have done it without you," Nora insisted. "I was drowning in guilt and self-hatred, and you threw me a lifeline. You helped me carry that unfair burden until I was strong enough to set it down completely. James kissed her forehead gently. And you gave me a home when I was drifting. You gave me a family and a purpose and a reason to put down roots. We saved each other, Nora. That is what love does. It saves us from the worst parts of ourselves and helps us become who we are meant to be. They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other in the midst of pain and built a life that honored both their struggles and their triumphs. Outside, the Wyoming prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, the same land that had witnessed their mother's death and their father's grief, their years of bitterness and blame, and finally their healing and redemption. I love you, James Sutton, Nora said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. Thank you for staying. Thank you for helping me carry that burden. Thank you for showing me that I deserve to be happy. I love you too, Nora, James replied, holding her close. And I will keep helping you carry whatever comes our way for as long as I breathe. That is what family does. That is what love means. We carry each other through the hard times and celebrate together in the good times, and we never ever give up on each other. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Nora felt her mother's presence once more, not as a weight of guilt, but as a gentle blessing. She imagined her mother looking down at this family they had created, at the love that had replaced bitterness, at the forgiveness that had replaced blame, and she knew with absolute certainty that her mother was proud. This was the life her mother had wanted for her children. Not a life without pain or struggle, but a life where love was stronger than grief, where family meant support instead of condemnation, where mistakes could be forgiven and wounds could heal. Nora had found that life, had built it with her own hands alongside the cowboy who had stopped to repair a fence and stayed to repair so much more. And as she stood in her kitchen with James's arms around her and her children's laughter ringing through the house, she knew that every moment of pain and struggle had been worth it to arrive at this place of profound peace and joy. The burden she had carried for so long was gone, transformed by love and forgiveness, and the passage of time into something that no longer weighed her down, but instead reminded her of how far she had come. And she would spend the rest of her days grateful for the second chance she had been given, for the family that surrounded her, and most of all for the man who had chosen to stand beside her through it all. James Sutton, the drifting cowboy who had become her husband, her partner, her dearest friend, the man who had helped her carry an unfair burden until she was strong enough to set it down and walk forward into a future full of light and love and infinite possibility. Together, they had built something that would last for generations, a legacy of healing and hope that their children would carry forward into the new century. And that, Nora knew, was the greatest tribute she could give to her mother's memory, to live fully, love fiercely, and create a family where forgiveness was always possible and no burden ever had to be carried alone.